My name is Gloria Whitman. I'm 84 years old, and I live alone in a small wooden cottage tucked away in rural Alabama. Most people in town only know me as the old church lady who used to lead the choir. But no one, absolutely no one, knows what I've carried for more than 60 years. Until yesterday. Because yesterday my youngest grandchild, Tamara, asked me a question that cracked open the grave I had buried my past in. "Grandma," she said, sitting at the edge of my worn-out rocking chair, "why is my birth certificate signed by a different man than Grandpa?" I blinked. I had buried that name so deep I nearly forgot how to pronounce it. "Because," I whispered, "your mother was one of 5 children I had with a man who wasn't my husband. Your mother's real father was my pastor." Tamara's mouth fell open. "What?" I nodded slowly, trembling. "He said I was his spiritual wife. Claimed it was divine, sacred, God's will. But what he did to me was anything but holy." She didn't speak. No one did. The house went still. But the silence wasn't what frightened me. It was the sound of footsteps outside the window. Low, calculated, like someone had been listening. And then 3 sharp knocks at the door. Froze. "Not again. Please, Lord, not again. Let me tell you everything before it's too late." I was only 21 when I first met Pastor Elijah Barnes. It was 1962, and I had just moved back to Montgomery after a short and failed marriage to a man who drank too much and loved too little. I was ashamed, divorced, childless, and worst of all, invisible. The church had always been my refuge. My mother used to say, "If you ever feel lost, sing louder than the storm." So I joined the choir. Every Sunday, I sang like the world was on fire, hoping the Lord would notice me. Instead, Pastor Elijah did. He was tall, with a deep voice that made the pews tremble. Charismatic, gentle. And when he preached, it felt like the heavens cracked open just to listen. The whole congregation was spellbound by him. But somehow, he only ever looked at me. First it felt like honor. I thought I'd been chosen for something sacred. He said I had the spirit of Ruth, and the beauty of Esther. He'd quote scripture as compliments, twisting the words of the Bible into flattery dipped in honey. And I drank it. I remember the first time he called me into his office. I was trembling, thought maybe I'd done something wrong. But he just smiled, lit a candle, closed the blinds. Then he whispered, "The Lord told me you're my spiritual wife. That our union is not carnal, but divine. I have a mission, and you're part of it." I didn't understand. I was raised to obey my leaders. And he was my shepherd. He touched my face so gently like he was anointing me. And when he kissed me, I didn't resist. I thought it was holy. I thought I was special. That day began a secret life I would live for the next 16 years. Behind the pulpit, he preached fire and brimstone. But behind closed doors, he made promises he never intended to keep. He said God allowed him to take multiple spiritual wives, but I was the first, the chosen one. We never married legally. There was no ceremony, no vows. Just whispered prayers and bodies pressed together in the back room of the church. By the time I was 23, I was pregnant with his first child. And that's when everything started to unravel. He panicked. "You mustn't tell anyone," he hissed one night. "They won't understand God's plan. They'll crucify me like they did Jesus." I cried and begged for us to come forward. I wanted to raise the baby in truth, not in shame. But he convinced me it would destroy the church. And I believed him. So I told everyone I had met a man on a church mission trip. Good man. Kind man. Who tragically died in a car accident. No one ever questioned it. They brought casseroles. They wept with me. Even Pastor Elijah prayed over me publicly. All while rubbing my belly in secret, whispering, "Our child will be a prophet." I bore him 5 children. Each one conceived in silence, birthed in lies, and raised under the weight of a name that never belonged to them. I watched my babies grow up not knowing who their real father was. I watched Elijah hug them from the pulpit and shake their hands like a stranger. I watched my oldest son call another man dad, because I married again, just to survive the shame. But no one knew the truth. Not even my children. Until last month. A letter arrived from an old church member who'd moved to Atlanta. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen in over 40 years. Me and Elijah, holding hands at a church retreat, smiling. Behind us, a child in a stroller, our child. Tamara had found the envelope and showed it to her mother, my third daughter with Elijah. And that's when the questions started. But I hadn't even finished explaining when those knocks came at the door. Because there was something I hadn't told them yet. Elijah Barnes is still alive. And he wants his spiritual wife back. But not for love. Not for God. For silence. Because he's running for city council. And someone has started leaking secrets. I stood from my chair, heart racing. I reached beneath the cushion and pulled out a tiny pistol I hadn't used in decades. If he came back into my life thinking I was still the naive girl who sang hymns and followed blindly, he was about to learn that I wasn't singing anymore. I was ready to speak. But as I crept toward the door, I saw a shadow slip past the window. And then the door slowly creaked open on its own. To be continued. If this story has you gripping your seat and you want to hear what happens next, how a grandmother's truth unravels decades of lies, then stay with me. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. You're not ready for what comes next. The door groaned as it opened, the hinges whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I froze, pistol shaking in my hand. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct in my body screamed to run. But I was tired of running. For 60 years, I'd lived beneath the weight of another man's calling. I wasn't about to be silenced now. A figure stepped into the doorway. But it wasn't Elijah. It was my eldest son, Raymond. His face looked older than I remembered. Creases around his eyes, worry etched across his brow. He wasn't supposed to be in town. "Mom," he said, voice low and urgent. "We need to talk." He knows. Elijah knows you told Tamara. And he's coming. My knees buckled. I reached for the wall. "How do you know?" I whispered, heart pounding like war drums. Raymond stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "Because he called me." Those words sent a chill down my spine that no blanket could warm. You see, Raymond had no idea growing up that Elijah Barnes was his real father. I had married a kind, gentle widower named Harold Whitman when Raymond was only 3, and he raised Raymond as his own. Elijah watched from a distance, always lurking at the edge of church functions, offering vague blessings, never too close, never too far. I told myself Harold was enough. That lies, when told in love, could protect everyone. But lies don't protect. They rot. "What did he say?" I asked, bracing myself. Raymond's lips trembled. "He told me I was his firstborn. He said the Lord finally revealed it to him, and he wants to restore our spiritual bond. He also mentioned you, said you've turned against God, that you've corrupted your bloodline." I felt my soul twist. The same man who called me his spiritual wife was now calling me a corrupter. I sat down slowly, the pistol still gripped tight in my hand. "Raymond, I need to tell you everything. Not just about your father, but about me. The me you never met." And so I told him. The whole ugly truth. How Elijah had approached me like a shepherd rescuing a lost lamb. How he twisted scripture into submission. How he told me our children were chosen. How he convinced me to keep them hidden, to lie to them, to the world, to myself. I told him about the nights I cried alone while Elijah kissed other women in the name of spiritual union. I told him how I once bled on the church floor during my 3rd pregnancy while Elijah led a revival outside, never stopping to check on me. And I told him how I'd lived in fear for decades, because Elijah made sure I knew. If I ever spoke out, no one would believe a hysterical woman over a man of God. When I finished, Raymond didn't speak. He just sat beside me, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I always felt something was missing," he said. "Like a gap in my story. And now I know why." He placed his hand over mine, the one still gripping the pistol. "You don't need this, Mom," he whispered. "You need truth. You need to tell your story." But Raymond didn't understand. Truth is a luxury when you're dealing with a man like Elijah Barnes. Because Elijah didn't just lead a church. He built an empire. After I left the congregation in 1981, he started a new ministry called Fountain of Light Revival. It grew fast. TV sermons, radio broadcasts, healing tours across the South. He called himself Apostle Elijah by then. Claimed miracles followed him. And behind the curtain, he still kept spiritual wives. Women from broken homes, desperate souls, believers who wanted to be special. He used them. Just like he used me. Only this time it wasn't just their bodies. It was their money, their land, their voice. He silenced one woman who tried to speak out by claiming she was mentally ill. Another. She disappeared. Now he was trying to run for city council, claiming he wanted to bring holiness into local government. But I knew what he really wanted: control. Raymond didn't understand the kind of man his father was. "Son," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. "He's not just a liar. He's dangerous." Raymond nodded slowly. "Then we expose him. We go to the media. Police. Whoever will listen." I shook my head. "That's not enough. He knows how to cover tracks. He's been doing it for 60 years. Raymond leaned back, thinking. "Then maybe we do it the same way he did, quietly. Carefully. From the inside." I wasn't sure what he meant at first. But then he opened his briefcase. Inside was a folder. Thick one. He had hired a private investigator 6 months earlier. Why? Because of a woman named Clara Banks. His ex-girlfriend. She had vanished after joining Elijah's church 2 years ago. Her parents claimed she ran off with a holy mission. Raymond never believed it. He'd been digging. And what he found? Financial abuse. False property transfers. Audio recordings of Elijah coercing women into sacred unions. Even a secret registry of women he claimed to have blessed. And then Raymond pulled out something I never expected to see. A marriage license. Filed in a small county outside Montgomery. Name. Elijah's name. Dated. Was a fake. Filed without my presence. Forged. But it meant one thing. He was trying to lay legal claim to me. Maybe even my home. My estate. Why would he do this now? Asked stunned. Raymond looked grim. Because you're the last woman alive who can ruin him. We sat in silence as the night deepened around us. Tamara had gone to bed upstairs, unaware of the war brewing below. I stared at the candle flickering on the mantel, the same way it had flickered in Elijah's office all those years ago, the first time he whispered that I was chosen. Chosen to suffer. Chosen to carry shame. No more. Then we fight, I said, standing tall. Not with guns. Not with silence. But with truth. We bring every woman he hurt into the light. Raymond smiled. Then we start tomorrow. But the next morning our plans changed. Because when I opened the door to get the morning paper, there was a package on the porch. Wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside was a photo. Me. And Elijah. But this time we were in bed. Sleeping. And it was recent. Too recent. Someone had been in my house. To be continued. If this story gripped your soul and you want to know how Gloria uncovers a decades-long web of spiritual abuse and takes back her power, don't scroll away. Like, comment, and subscribe right now. Next chapter will leave you speechless. The photograph slipped from my hands and fluttered to the wooden floor like a dead leaf in the wind. I stared at it. My body frozen, my heart thudding so hard I thought I might collapse. It was me. Lying in my own bed. In my nightgown. Fast asleep. Beside me, Elijah Barnes. His arm was stretched across the pillow. His face turned toward mine. His eyes closed. He looked peaceful. Intimate. Possessive. But I hadn't seen that man in over 40 years. Not in person. Not in my home. My hands trembled as I backed away from the photo, unable to process how it existed. I had no memory of him being there. No recollection of this moment. No idea when or how it was taken. And then I noticed it. The frame of my bed in the picture. It was my old bed frame. The one I had thrown away 5 months ago. My legs nearly gave out. He had been in my house. Before I ever told Tamara the truth. Before Raymond knocked on my door last night. Elijah had already been here. Watching. Waiting. Lying beside me while I slept like a predator, enjoying the quiet before the hunt. Raymond rushed down the stairs, alerted by the sound of the photo falling. He picked it up and froze. His face turned gray. "We need to get out of this house," he said sharply. "Now." I nodded, breath caught in my throat, heart trying to leap through my chest. Raymond grabbed Tamara from upstairs and shoved clothes into a bag. We got into his car and drove straight to his apartment in Birmingham. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I was angry. How dare he? How dare Elijah step into my home like he still owned me? How dare he break into my privacy, my safety, my peace, and think I would be too old, too weak, too broken to fight back? But I wasn't the same woman anymore. The next morning, I called the only person who knew what it meant to be called a spiritual wife by Elijah Barnes. Her name was Marian Ashcroft. We hadn't spoken since 1986. She had been the second wife. I remembered her as a quiet, beautiful woman who always wore long gloves to church and never spoke unless Elijah spoke first. We found her living outside Selma, on a small piece of land she inherited after her father passed. At first she didn't want to talk. Slammed the door when she saw me. But I begged. "I need you," I whispered through the door. "He's doing it again, Marian. And now he's running for office. We can't let this happen." There was silence. And then slowly she opened the door. Her face was tired. Her eyes hollow. But behind that pain, I saw the same fire that once flickered in me. "He ruined my life," she said quietly. "But he'll never do it again. Come in." And so we sat. Two aging women, bonded by one man's deceit, sharing memories like war stories. She told me how Elijah had convinced her she was his rebirth. That their union was the completion of divine prophecy. That if she disobeyed, she would break the chain of salvation. He married her in secret, just like he did to me. Falsified documents, whispered sermons. And when she got pregnant, he made her give the child to a distant cousin to raise, so the church wouldn't find out. "He told me I wasn't worthy to be a mother yet," she said through clenched teeth. "That the Lord needed my full body and mind. So I gave her up. My own daughter. I don't even know where she is." My throat tightened. "I had 5 with him." She blinked. 5. He nodded. "And I kept them all. But I lied to every one of them." She shook her head slowly, tears falling. "He stole our voices. Then let's take them back." We formed a plan. Raymond dug through property records and uncovered at least 3 other women whose names had mysteriously been attached to parcels of land later transferred to one of Elijah's shell ministries. We found tax filings, money trails, real estate schemes. We created a list. 7 women. 7 victims. Spiritual wives, coerced followers, lost souls. 5 of them were still alive. We met secretly, one by one, in Marian's basement. We shared our truths, our shame, our rage. And something powerful happened in that room. We stopped whispering. We stopped crying. We started planning. Raymond hired a civil attorney who specialized in religious abuse cases. He helped us build a legal strategy, not just for public exposure but for restitution. Because Elijah hadn't just stolen our bodies. He stole years, land, children, money. He built an empire on our silence. But it was crumbling, one brick at a time. Then came the day we launched the campaign. We called it the First Wife Project. We started with anonymous letters sent to every church Elijah had ever led. Inside were photos, timelines, testimonies, and copies of the forged marriage certificates. We posted videos online using blurred faces, altered voices. The story spread like wildfire. People started asking questions. reporters, lawyers, church elders, former members. And Elijah, he went quiet for 2 weeks, until one morning I received a voicemail. It was him. "I told you, Gloria. You were always mine. You think this little rebellion will save you. You think anyone will believe an old woman with bitterness in her bones. You're still mine and I will end this." I deleted the message, but not before sending a copy to the attorney. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw lines, wrinkles, years of sorrow etched into my face. But I also saw strength, a woman who survived. I turned to Raymond and said, "Let's take it public." A week later I gave my first interview. On live television, face uncovered, voice steady. No more secrets. I told the world what he did to me. He named names, years, scriptures he twisted, children he fathered and disowned. The truth spilled out like fire, and the world finally listened. The backlash was immediate. Elijah's council campaign collapsed. Donors pulled out. His church board resigned. But still he didn't go down. He refused to be arrested, claimed persecution, hid behind his remaining followers, until something unexpected happened. One of his other wives, a woman we hadn't known about, stepped forward with something that changed everything. A birth certificate, for a child, signed by Elijah, and dated during a time he claimed celibacy. It was the final nail in the coffin. The DA opened an investigation. Charges were filed. And then Elijah disappeared. Vanished. No one could find him. No arrest. No closure. Only rumors. That he fled the country. That he died. That he was hiding in some mountain cabin with a new name and a new wife. But I didn't care anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. I was louder than his lies. Stronger than his sermons. And freer than I had ever been. But just when I thought the storm had passed, found a letter, slipped under my door. Handwritten. No envelope. One sentence. "You will always belong to me." To be continued. If this story is shaking you to your core, if you believe silence is no longer an option, then don't walk away now. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The fight isn't over yet. I held the letter in my hand for a long time. Just that one sentence. "You will always belong to me." There was no signature. But I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. Bold. Confident. Self-righteous. It was Elijah's. After all the pain, after the public exposure, after 5 decades of carrying the burden of his twisted theology on my back, he still believed I belonged to him. But I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't even tear the letter. I folded it carefully and placed it inside a locked box along with the forged marriage certificate, the photograph of him in my bed, and every document Raymond had collected. That letter didn't scare me. It confirmed one thing: he was still out there, watching, and still convinced I was his property. Raymond doubled our home security. Cameras on every corner. Motion detectors. Smart locks. Even the church across the street offered a guard to patrol at night. But fear wasn't my shadow anymore. Because something unexpected was happening. The other women, the ones who once cried in silence, were speaking up. Marian wrote an article for a national faith magazine titled, "He called it holy. I call it abuse." Another survivor, Teresa, went on a podcast and read parts of her prayer journals from the 90s, showing how Elijah manipulated her into isolation and financial ruin. A woman named Ruth, once too ashamed to even say his name, came forward on live TV and said, "He taught me to fear God, but I only feared him." We were no longer victims. We were witnesses. And our testimony was turning into a movement. Still, there was unfinished business. We hadn't found Elijah. And the law couldn't prosecute a ghost. That's when Raymond received a strange phone call from a blocked number. It was a man. Nervous. Breathing heavy. "I can't stay long," the man said. "But I know where Elijah is." Raymond stayed calm. "Who is this?" "I was his driver. For 2 years. He doesn't let people close, but I saw things, heard things. I know what he did. And I know he's hiding in Clearwater, Florida. A gated property. Name on the mailbox is E. Bennett. Blick. That was it. But it was enough. Raymond contacted a local investigator who confirmed that a man fitting Elijah's description had indeed been living under the name Elijah Bennett in a private waterfront estate registered to a Shell non-profit, one that traced back to the Fountain of Light Revival. We contacted the district attorney. Warrants were issued. But Elijah was gone before they arrived. He always moved fast when cornered. But this time he left something behind. Locked briefcase. Inside, among old sermons and bank account ledgers, was a stack of handwritten notes titled, The Book of Spiritual Wives. My name was at the top. And under it, a list of rules he had written for me in 1963. Rules like, you must not contradict the shepherd. Your womb is an altar. Your voice must be tempered by scripture. You will never leave unless released by divine order. I read it all with shaking hands. Then I burned it. And when the smoke curled into the night air, I felt something loosen in my chest. Something I didn't even know I'd been holding. Guilt. Not for what he did. But for all the years I let it define me. I looked at Raymond, tears in his eyes. Mom. I'm so sorry I never asked sooner. I placed my hand on his cheek. You were just a boy. I protected you the only way I knew how. But now we protect the next girls differently. With truth. That night something shifted. We got a call from a former church deacon, an elderly man who used to guard Elijah's inner circle. He'd heard the stories. He'd seen the interviews. And he had something. Videotape. From 1980. Full confession. Elijah preaching to a small group of inner disciples, laying out his vision for the spiritual marriage order. His words were vile. Cunning. He said. They'll never know what we're doing is real unless we give them God's language to believe it. So I give them God. I give them purpose. And they give me everything. He laughed. That laugh. The one I used to think was holy. The tape was turned over to the authorities immediately. It was the final piece the DA needed. Warrants were reissued. This time federal. The manhunt expanded. And finally, after months of searching, they caught him. At a remote cabin in the Georgia hills. Lone. No followers. No cameras. No pulpit. Just a man. Bitter. And for the first time silent. The arrest made national news. They called it the spiritual wife scandal. The headlines made my stomach turn. But beneath it all I felt peace. I testified at the trial. I told the courtroom about the 5 children I raised with a man who pretended to be God's voice. I told them how I spent nights bleeding, praying, breaking, and still singing in the choir. I told them how it feels to carry lies in your womb and smile in public. And when the verdict came back, guilty on 17 counts of spiritual abuse, coercion, fraud, and criminal conspiracy, I looked Elijah in the eye for the last time. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Because the women he built his kingdom on had finally pulled down the walls. He was sentenced to 45 years without parole. He'll die in that cell. But this story, it's not about Elijah anymore. It's about me. It's about all the women like me who were taught to whisper, taught to obey, taught to carry sacred lies like blessings. No more. Speak now. And if you're hearing my voice, then know this. Silence is never holy. And no man, not even one wearing a collar, can claim what belongs to God alone. To be continued. If you've stayed with me through this raw truth, don't stop here. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Because now, the real healing begins. The courtroom was silent when I stepped off the stand. It was the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Thick, waiting, uncertain. I didn't look back at Elijah again. I didn't need to. Let him sit there in that suit, surrounded by cold marble walls and younger lawyers who didn't know the half of what he'd done. Let him stew in the silence, the same silence he forced on me, and so many others, for decades. As I walked through the courthouse doors, sunlight struck my face. It felt foreign, almost rude, like a light I hadn't earned. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle on my skin, blinking against it. Then Raymond stepped up beside me, held my arm gently. "You were incredible," he said. But I didn't feel incredible. Felt hollow. Because while Elijah was headed to prison, my wounds didn't vanish with the sentence. The bruises he left weren't on my skin anymore, but deep in the folds of my memory. I had lived a life in fragments. My children, 5 of them, grew up under shadows they never deserved. Some still didn't know the full truth. Only Raymond and Tamara stood by me in court. The others, they had distanced themselves. Confused. Angry that the truth I'd finally revealed now made them question everything they thought they knew about who they were. I didn't blame them. But it still broke me. Especially Lily, my youngest. She was born in 1977, right at the end of my time with Elijah, when the lies were thickest and my body was near collapse. She was the most curious as a child, always asking why she looked different from her siblings, why her eyes were hazel when her father's were dark brown. I had dodged her questions for years. Until the day before the trial, when I called and told her the truth. Everything. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply said, "You lied for too long, Mom," and hung up. She never came to court. Never answered my messages again. I stared at my phone every night after that, praying for a sign, just one. And then, a week after the verdict, she sent me a letter. "I don't know who I am anymore. You gave me life but not the truth. I need time." That's all it said. No love, Lily. No return address. Just those words. I sat on my porch and read it over and over, letting it wash over me like a cold tide. Raymond tried to comfort me. So did Tamara. But I had to admit something out loud. I did protect them. But I also hurt them, I whispered one night to Marion, who had come to visit. I thought silence would shield them. But maybe I was just afraid. Marion nodded, gently setting down her cup of tea. We all were. She was right. Our generation was taught that women should be quiet, especially in the church. To question a man of God was to question God himself. But what happens when that man becomes your God? When his voice replaces your own? When his hand guides every decision until you don't know where you end and he begins? That's not faith. That's captivity. We needed to say it out loud. So we did. Together, Marion and I hosted a gathering of survivors. Not just women from Elijah's ministry, but others. Women who had been spiritually manipulated, emotionally cornered, financially drained by so-called shepherds. We met in a community center. Old folding chairs and styrofoam cups of coffee. No frills. Just truth. And for the first time I heard stories even more horrifying than mine. A woman named Darlene had given up her house to a pastor who claimed God told him she was living above her spiritual level. A lady named Yvonne had been excommunicated for refusing to cleanse herself in front of the elders. And another, sweet, soft-voiced Grace, told us how her daughter had been married in the spirit at age 16 to a 50-year-old prophet. We sat there, each of us broken in our own way, but finally in a place where we weren't gaslit, shamed, or told that our pain was part of God's process. We called ourselves the unspoken women. And we made a vow. Never again. Never again would a woman be silenced by a pulpit. Never again would scripture be twisted into shackles. Never again would a spiritual wife go unheard. Our stories would become weapons. And we had a plan. We started a foundation in Lily's name, the Lily Project, to provide legal aid, counseling, and emergency housing for women escaping spiritual manipulation. I didn't ask Lily's permission, but I prayed that one day it would mean something to her. The first woman we helped was a 23-year-old named Jolene. She showed up at our office barefoot, holding a Bible to her chest and whispering, "I just need to be free." We housed her, got her therapy, reunited her with her family. And when she smiled again for the first time, I wept. Because that was healing. Real healing. The kind I never got at her age. And maybe, just maybe, helping her was my redemption. Few months later, something strange happened. I received a package in the mail. It was old, wrapped in worn brown paper. No return name. Inside was a photo album. Not of Elijah, but of me. Me as a choir leader. Me holding my babies. Me baking bread with Marion. Me planting flowers. Me laughing. Photos I had never seen before. All dated between 1962 and 1979. It was like someone had been watching me, documenting my life. But not with malice. With memory. And at the very back of the album was a letter. Handwritten. You were more than what he made you. More than what they took. More than the lies you buried to survive. Don't forget that. A friend. There was no signature. No clues. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. Felt remembered. And there's something holy about that. To be remembered. Not for your shame. Not for your silence. But for your survival. Still, there was one part of my healing I hadn't yet faced. One door I hadn't dared knock on. Lily's. But the time was coming. Because a storm had passed. And the air finally felt clear enough to speak. To be continued. If you've walked this path with me this far, I hope you feel the power in your own voice too. Like, comment, and subscribe, because in the next chapter I'm finally going to face my daughter. And what she says next will break me, or heal me. The sun was just beginning to rise when I decided I was going to see Lily. No more waiting. No more giving her time. Time I realized could become just another excuse. Another way to hide. Another silent prayer with no feet. It had been nearly 6 months since the trial. 6 months since I told her the truth about her father. 6 months of unanswered texts, returned mail, and that one chilling letter she sent. You gave me life, but not the truth. That line had lived inside my chest like a splinter in the ribs. I wasn't going to die with that splinter. So I got dressed. I wore a soft blue blouse she once bought me for Mother's Day. Back when she was 12, and saved up babysitting money to surprise me. I found the card too, still tucked in my Bible. You're the best, Mommy. I love your stories and how you braid my hair. I held it like a lifeline. Raymond offered to drive me, but I said no. This was mine to do. Alone. Her house was 2 towns over. I'd never actually visited before. She'd moved in during the time I was still too ashamed to face my own children, too afraid they'd look at me and see the lie instead of their mother. Now, I didn't care how she looked at me. I just needed to see her. The neighborhood was quiet. Trees lined the sidewalks like old watchmen, and kids' bikes leaned against porches. Her house had red bricks, white trim, and a rose bush out front, overgrown and wild like it needed someone to tame it. I stood at her front door for what felt like years. Then I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. And then I heard it. Child's voice. Mommy. Someone's at the door. Froze. My heart climbed into my throat. I hadn't even known she had children. Footsteps approached. Lock click. The door opened just a crack. And there she was. Lily. My baby girl. But she wasn't a baby anymore. She looked like a woman who had seen storms and survived them. Tired eyes. Loose curls pulled into a messy bun. A child clinging to her leg. She didn't speak. Neither did I. We just looked at each other, both of us blinking away emotions we didn't have the words for. Then I whispered, I'm not here to explain, or defend, or ask for forgiveness. I'm just here because I miss you. Lily's jaw clenched. The little girl beside her, maybe 5 or 6, peeked up at me with wide brown eyes. Is she the grandma? She asked. Lily didn't answer. I swallowed hard. May I sit with you for 5 minutes? Then I'll go. She hesitated. Then slowly she opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and toys. The kitchen table had a stack of laundry on it. A baby monitor buzzed faintly from the counter. Lily poured tea but didn't hand me a cup. We sat in silence. I let the quiet stretch. I never wanted to lie to you, I said softly, watching the steam rise from the untouched mug. But I was told that truth would destroy everything. And maybe it would've. But silence destroyed more. She didn't look at me. I went on. I stayed because I thought that's what God wanted. That obedience was holiness. That my pain was part of His plan. And I was wrong. Finally Lily spoke. Her voice cracked. You made me call a stranger Daddy. I grieved a father I never knew. And you stood by. All those birthdays. All those tears. You never told me he wasn't real. My breath shook. Because I thought if you knew the truth, you'd hate me. I did, she said, her voice trembling. I hated you. I hated myself. I hated God. I nodded, tears slipping down my face. I know. Her eyes finally met mine. Red. Honest. But then I watched your interview. My heart stopped. I saw you cry, she continued. I saw you call it what it was, abuse. And for the first time, I didn't see a liar. I saw a survivor. My lip quivered. I couldn't speak. I still don't know if I forgive you, she whispered. But I believe you. Sob escaped me. Quiet. Heavy. Holy. That's enough, I said. That's more than I thought I'd ever get. She wiped her cheeks and finally poured a second cup of tea, then slid it across the table toward me. Her name is Eliana, she said, nodding toward the little girl who now peeked at me from the hallway. She looks like you, I whispered. She should. She's your granddaughter. I covered my mouth, overwhelmed. Do you want to meet her? Lily asked. I nodded, too full of emotion to form a sentence. Eliana, come say hi to Grandma. The little girl stepped forward shyly, holding a drawing in her hand. She looked at me, then glanced at Lily, as if asking if it was okay. It's a butterfly, she said, holding up the crayon picture. I made it today. I bent slowly and took the picture in my hands, eyes watering. Did you know butterflies start out as something completely different? I asked her. But they still become beautiful. Eliana nodded, her curls bouncing. Like magic. Exactly like magic. And in that moment, sitting in a simple kitchen with chipped mugs, with a daughter who believed me and a granddaughter who smiled like she'd always known me, I felt something I hadn't felt in over 60 years. Felt whole. Later that evening, as I got into my car to leave, Lily followed me out. I don't want you to be a stranger anymore, she said. I won't be, I promised. Not again. She reached into her pocket and handed me something. A new photograph. It was Eliana, wearing my old blue choir robe, smiling, holding a tiny tambourine. She wants to sing, Lily said. I clutched the photo to my chest. I'll teach her. I drove home that night with the windows down and the stars bright above me. The road stretched wide and open like the future. And for once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peace. To be continued. If this moment moved you, if you believe that redemption is real and that it's never too late to heal your story, please like, comment, and subscribe. Because in the next chapter, something unexpected from Elijah's past is about to rise from the ashes, and it changes everything. I thought it was over. Elijah was behind bars. My daughter had spoken to me again. I had met my granddaughter. The silence that used to haunt me had turned into hymns. Soft ones, shaky ones, but real. But peace, I was learning, is never permanent when your past still has legs. Started with a phone call from Marion. I hadn't heard her voice in weeks. She'd been off the grid, visiting one of her sons out west. When I answered, I could hear something in her tone I hadn't heard before. Fear. Gloria, she whispered. You need to sit down. I was already seated, but my heart stood at attention. What is it? I just got a call from the DA's office, she said. They found something in Elijah's cell. I felt my breath catch. What did they find? A journal. And inside it was a list. Long one. Locations. Women. Some are dead. Some alive. Some we didn't even know about. I clutched the phone so tightly my fingers went numb. He kept track. I whispered. Every detail, Marion said. He called it the garden. He said we were all flowers planted in divine soil. And Gloria, your name. It wasn't just first. I waited, my throat dry. It was underlined. Over and over. And next to it he wrote, "The root, the beginning, the one I must never lose." Felt sick. "He still believes it," I murmured. "Yes," Marion said. "Even in prison. Especially in prison." I closed my eyes, the weight of those words settling on me like an old shroud I thought I had buried. "He said something else," she added. "He mentioned a child." My eyes opened. "What child?" "A sixth," Marion said softly. "Born in 1966. A boy." I shook my head immediately. "No, that's not possible. I was between pregnancies." I'm just telling you what the DA found." Elijah wrote that he arranged for the baby to be taken at birth, given to a loyal couple in his congregation. He said the child would be raised in fire to return as a blade. My blood ran cold. He had taken one of my children. No, that couldn't be. "I would have remembered," I whispered. "I would have felt." But then it hit me. The illness in 66. The surgery the church nurse said I needed after I collapsed. I'd been bleeding, confused, drugged. They said it was a miscarriage, that Elijah had prayed over me and the Lord took the child home. But what if that wasn't the truth? What if he'd stolen my baby? I gripped the table to steady myself. "I need that journal," I said. "The DA said they'd give us access," Marion replied. "But Gloria, there's more." "More." "There's a man. His name is David Marks. He showed up 2 days ago in Tennessee. Claims he grew up in a strict, prophetic household, tied to Elijah's early ministry. Claims he was adopted. He found your photo in the box of an old preacher who just died, and said he felt something pull him toward it." I couldn't breathe. A son. A stolen son. I'd carried guilt my whole life for the 5 I raised under lies. But a sixth. A child I never even knew existed. I needed to meet him. Raymond drove me to Tennessee 2 days later. I couldn't focus during the ride. My mind twisted with memories from 1966. The pain, the silence, the nurse's cold hands. I'd buried that time so deep that I had forgotten what it felt like to remember. David was waiting for us at a quiet church camp tucked in the Appalachian foothills. He was tall, with wide shoulders and deep-set eyes that flicked up when he saw me. And something in me, something deep and maternal and ancient, recognized him before he even spoke. He walked slowly toward me, a folder in hand. "I think I'm your son," he said. I trembled. "Why do you think that?" "Yes." He opened the folder. Inside were old photos. Elijah, younger and surrounded by followers. A woman I vaguely remembered. Deborah? Holding a baby. Documents. Birth certificate. Falsified adoption papers. A diary entry from the dead preacher that read, "Baby from Gloria. Delivered during her collapse." Elijah named him David. Said he was chosen for the end times. I nearly collapsed again. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at David. This grown man, raised in theology I'd fought so hard to escape. A man forged in fire, just like Elijah had planned. But he wasn't hard. He was kind, confused, seeking. "I thought I was crazy," he said. "Until I saw your interview. Then I felt like I finally found my breath." I reached for him, my hands shaking. He let me hug him. And when I did, the years between us evaporated. I wasn't an old woman hugging a stranger. I was a mother holding her stolen son. We sat for hours that day, talking, crying, relearning, reconnecting. He told me how they had tried to turn him into Elijah's successor. How he'd preached by age 7, baptized people at 9, spoke in tongues before he could read. But something always felt wrong, he said. Like a shadow over my soul. He nodded. That was him. We walked the campgrounds together, slowly, silently. And just as the sun set, David turned to me. "I have something else," he said. Something he told me, just before I left. I braced myself. He said, "Gloria will never win. Because while she's fighting ghosts, I planted seeds that haven't bloomed yet. Froze. Seeds, I whispered. David nodded. He meant people. Followers. Ones who still believe in him. Ones who think you betrayed him. That you're the enemy. I looked up at the darkening trees. They were out there. Still faithful. Still dangerous. The fight wasn't over. And now that I'd found my son, the war had only grown deeper. Because if Elijah planted seeds, it was time I became the gardener who knew how to uproot. To be continued. If this chapter gripped your heart, if you felt the shock, the love, the fury, then please like, comment and subscribe. Because in the next chapter, the final battle is coming. And this time, Elijah's remaining followers will stop at nothing to silence me forever. But they've forgotten one thing. I'm not the same woman they left in silence. I couldn't sleep after meeting David. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that journal page again. My name underlined over and over like a curse. And now, Elijah's last words through David kept ringing in my ears. She's fighting ghosts, but I planted seeds. He meant his disciples. His hidden loyalists. Those who still clung to his voice like scripture. I'd spent the last year pulling back the curtain on the man, the predator, the false prophet who broke women with a Bible in one hand and a lie in the other. I thought I had survived the fire. I didn't realize there were still embers burning, waiting for air. Now I had a son I never knew I had. And new threats. 2 nights after returning from Tennessee, my front door was scratched up. Deep, ragged grooves across the wood, as though someone had dragged a knife down it. My security camera. The wire snipped clean. Raymond came over immediately. He wanted me to leave town again. But I refused. I've hidden enough, I said firmly, staring at the scratches. If they want a war, I'll give them the kind that burns truth into every wall they hide behind. We turned my home into a fortress. Marion moved in with me for safety. David stayed in town, quietly working with the DA to verify every detail of his stolen identity. And Raymond began coordinating with local police to document every threat, every suspicious car, every envelope slipped under the door that said, "Stop talking or you'll be silenced like the others." But I kept talking. We went live with a national news network. Me, David, Marion, Teresa. 3 generations of women and 1 son stolen from a womb that was never meant to carry shame. I told the world again. Louder. We launched an event, Unspoken No More. A gathering of the silenced, and invited survivors of faith-based abuse across the country. They came. By the hundreds. Women from storefront churches, revival tents, mega churches, rural ministries. They all stood up and said the words they'd never been allowed to say. It happened to me too. I sat in the front row, watching woman after woman step up to the mic, their voices trembling but rising. And every story was like a piece of my own being held in someone else's hand. It was beautiful. Until the fire. Midway through the second day of the gathering, someone pulled the alarm. First we thought it was a false trigger. Then we saw the smoke. The back entrance was ablaze. Set intentionally. A bottle soaked in kerosene had been thrown through the back window. One of Elijah's seeds. No doubt. Panic erupted. Screams. Running feet. I grabbed Marion's hand and helped usher women out the side. Raymond was already shouting orders, helping mothers with small children escape through the kitchen exit. We made it out safely. But not everyone did. A woman named Carla, a survivor from Mississippi, was badly burned trying to rescue an elderly speaker still inside. The image of her dress melting into her skin is something I'll never unsee. The police ruled it arson. And they found something spray-painted on the back wall of the building. She will fall. They meant me. But what they didn't know was that I already had. Years ago. On a church floor. In a dark hospital room. In the arms of a man who claimed he was chosen. I had already fallen. So deep it took 60 years to find the surface again. And now that I had risen, nothing was pushing me back down. We moved the conference to a nearby church the next day. I took the podium last. I held Carla's hand before I stepped up. She was bandaged and still in pain, but she smiled and nodded. "Go," she whispered. "Say it again." So I did. "Years ago, I gave birth to a child I was told had died. But he didn't. He was taken. Stolen. Just like so many of us had pieces of ourselves stolen by men who wore collars but had no souls." The crowd went silent. I lived most of my life thinking obedience meant silence. That good women suffer quietly. But I'm here to tell you, God never asked for our silence. That wasn't his voice. That was his voice, Elijah's. I felt the anger in my throat tremble. "Let this fire," I said, raising my voice, "this act of terror, be the last time any of us call it holy. Let our voices rise louder than the men who tried to bury them." Applause thundered. Women cried, cheered, prayed. And when I stepped down, David was there waiting. He hugged me not like a stranger, not even like a lost son, but like a man who finally knew who his mother was. That night I received a final letter. Unmarked. No stamp. Slid under the door while we slept. This one wasn't from Elijah. It was from her. From the woman who threw the firebomb. She signed it only, "Loyal Flame." And she wrote, "He told us you'd betray the order, that your womb carried rebellion. But now I see, maybe he lied to us all. I'll never follow him again. And I hope your son finds his real voice. Sorry. For the fire. For the fear. I thought I was doing God's work. I know better now." I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time. Maybe not all the seeds Elijah planted grew into monsters. Some just needed new soil. That night, David joined us for dinner. We sang hymns with Marian, laughed, talked about what it meant to start over. At one point Eliana, my granddaughter, asked David, "Are you really Grandma's baby?" David smiled and said, "I think I always was. I just had to find my way back." And for the first time in decades, my table was full. My truth was known. And the fire wasn't burning me anymore. To be continued. If this story moved you, if you felt the burn of the past and the breath of healing, please like, comment, and subscribe. Next chapter is the beginning of something powerful. Because when Elijah faces sentencing, I'll have one final thing to say. And this time the whole world will hear it. The courthouse felt colder this time. Not because of the weather. It was spring now, and soft green had begun pushing through the cracks in the sidewalk, but because of what this day meant. Sentencing. Elijah Barnes, once Apostle Elijah, once the voice of God to an entire congregation of thousands, now stood before a judge with chains on his wrists and nothing in his eyes. They had asked if any of the survivors wanted to make a final statement. Many couldn't bear it. Some were too traumatized. Others said they'd already said everything in interviews, podcasts, articles. But I knew I had to speak. Not because I wanted to see him suffer. Not because I needed revenge. But because there was one thing I had never said directly to him, at least not with power in my voice. I had never told him that he didn't win. I had written it, thought it, whispered it in my prayers. But I had never stood across from the man who took everything from me. My youth, my peace, my children's innocence, and said, "You didn't win." So when the judge invited victim statements, I stood. The courtroom was full. David sat behind me. Marian on my right. Raymond and Lily beside each other, shoulder to shoulder like siblings who had always known each other. Eliana sat in the back, drawing butterflies on a notepad. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. Elijah didn't look up. I didn't care. I wasn't talking for him anymore. I looked straight ahead, my voice clear. My name is Gloria Whitman. I am 84 years old. I have 5 children. And for most of my adult life, I lived under the thumb of a man who convinced me that my silence was sacred. Pause. I was 21 when he first kissed me and told me it was God's will. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a lifetime of spiritual abuse. Elijah didn't flinch. His lawyer looked uncomfortable. Continued. He made me believe that obedience was holiness, that pain was sacrifice, that my womb was his to command. I bore him children. Hid them. I lied to them. I raised them in confusion. I buried pieces of myself just to survive. A hush fell over the room. But I'm not standing here as a victim today. I'm standing here as a survivor. A mother. A grandmother. A woman who crawled through decades of shame and finally learned to speak. My voice didn't crack. Elijah, you told me I belonged to you. That I was your first flower in the garden. That I could never leave. I looked right at him then. He still didn't meet my eyes. But I did leave. And not only did I leave, I tore the whole garden out by its roots. A gasp rippled through the room. Elijah Barnes, you didn't win. You planted fear in me, but I grew faith. You stole my child, but I found him. You tried to bury me, but I became a seed. And now, I bloom in truth. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them. You told me I was the beginning. And you were right. 'Cause for me a storm came. Reckoning. And it's still coming. I turned to the judge. I pray you give him every year he deserves. But more than that, I pray you listen to the women who will never stand in this courtroom. Because they're gone or too scared or too broken. Silence. I stepped away. Elijah still hadn't moved. But as I passed his table, I heard him murmur something. Barely audible. Still mine. Stop. Looked down at him. And said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. No. I never was. Then I walked away. The judge sentenced him to 45 years without parole. On top of the 15 he was already serving from earlier federal charges. The courtroom erupted in quiet tears and held hands. But for me, the moment I walked out of that courthouse, it was over. Not the work. Pain. The ghost of that little church girl who thought holiness meant losing herself. That night I went home and sat on my porch. The stars were out. The wind gentle. Marion was inside helping Lily bake bread. David and Raymond were playing chess. Eliana was humming something from Sunday school. I was whole. But then I got a call. Private number. I let it ring. Then voicemail. Played it. A woman's voice. Fragile. Young. Miss Gloria. I don't know if you'll ever hear this. My name is Angela. I was his last spiritual wife. He told me you were a witch. That if I ever contacted you, I'd burn. Silence. But I've been watching your story. And now, I think I'm ready to leave. I sat up straight. I have a baby, she continued. A daughter. He said she was special. Ozen. But now I think, he just meant owned. Long pause. Can you help me? Blick. I didn't breathe for a moment. Then I picked up my phone. And called her back. Because I knew what it was like to be her. And because once you've walked through fire, you don't walk past someone still burning. To be continued. If you've made it this far, I thank you. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who was ever told her pain was holy. Next chapter is the final chapter. And in it, we take back the last child, end the last lie, and close the garden forever. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters too. The next morning I packed a bag. Not a large one, just enough for 2 nights. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not Raymond. Not Marion. Not even Lily. Some things you do alone. Angela had left only a number. No address, no city. But I called her back and she answered. Her voice trembled like a child on the edge of a scream. She was in a small town near Savannah, Georgia. A rented cabin behind a failing gospel retreat center. Said she hadn't stepped outside in 2 weeks. Said she felt like a ghost, haunting her own life. And her daughter. She doesn't cry much, Angela whispered. She just stares. Like she knows something's wrong. Like she knows he wants her. That was all I needed. I drove through the back roads of Georgia with the windows down and the sun low on my dashboard. I prayed as I went. Not for courage, I had that now. I prayed for clarity. For words. Because what do you say to a woman whose entire world was crafted by the same hands that once silenced you? You say the truth. And you say it gently. Angela was waiting on the porch when I arrived. She looked like I had decades ago. Thin, exhausted eyes too old for her face. Her hair was in a messy twist. She held her daughter close to her chest, as if the baby might disappear if she let go. "Miss Gloria," she said, voice cracking. He nodded. "You can call me Gloria." The cabin was small and dark. The curtains were drawn, the lights dim. It smelled of fear, of fast food left untouched and milk gone sour. But I didn't flinch. I sat at the table and waited. Angela paced. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she said. "He told me I was the vessel, that my daughter would be the new prophet, that I would raise her until he returned." "He's not returning," I said softly. She stopped pacing. "But if I leave, what if I lose my soul?" I stood and gently took her hand. "You've already lost pieces of it. But I can help you find them again." Tears filled her eyes. She looked down at her daughter, tiny, swaddled in an old cloth with a cross stitched into the hem. "I named her Grace," she whispered, "because I thought he gave her to me." Smiled. "He didn't. But Grace still fits. Because Grace is what pulled you out of that place and brought you here." She nodded slowly, as if realizing it for the first time. We stayed up all night talking. I told her everything, not just about Elijah but about me, the 5 children, the 6th, the shame, the war, the healing. And then I said what no one ever told me when I was her age. "You are not ruined." She wept. 4 hours. The next morning, I drove her and baby Grace to a safe house affiliated with the Lily Project. Marion had arranged everything. A therapist, a lawyer, and a new phone number. Angela never looked back. And I didn't need her to. Because I knew she would rise. Just like I did. Weeks passed. David found steady work as a youth counselor. Ironic in a way, considering the childhood he never had. But maybe that's why he was good at it. He told the truth, gently but boldly, and the kids listened. They trusted him. Raymond and Lily co-founded a program for children born from spiritual abuse. They called it Truth Ties. Their first event drew more than 300 kids and families. And me. Published a book. The garden was never holy. It became more than a memoir. It was a movement. Churches invited me to speak. Colleges asked me to teach. Reporters followed up. Survivors came out of the shadows like moths who finally found the moonlight. And then, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a simple note. "He died. Alone. Last night. They found your photo in his hand." I sat for a long time holding that piece of paper. Not in joy. Not in sadness. But in silence. Not the silence he once used to control me. Peace. Final. Will. I didn't tell anyone at first. I just walked out to the garden behind my house. The one I had planted with Lily and Eliana just months earlier. Tomatoes. Rosemary. Marigolds. I knelt down and dug a small hole beneath the rose bush. And I buried the letter. Not out of ritual. But as a choice. To let go. He was gone. The man who once called me his root. Who claimed ownership of my womb, my mind, my life, gone. And I was still here. Still breathing. Still blooming. At our next survivor meeting, I stood before the circle and told them the news. There were tears. Some nodded in relief. Others didn't know what to feel. But I told them what I knew deep in my bones. He is dead. But we are not. And what we build from here, he can never touch. The room erupted in applause. But my eyes were on one woman, Angela. She held Grace in her arms. The baby giggled and reached for a butterfly fluttering just outside the open window. And I realized something then. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Of new families. New churches. New truth. We are the women they never expected to rise. And rise we did. Folded hands, thank you for joining me through this journey. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that silence is not safety and that survival is not shame, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Because you never know who's still burning, waiting for someone brave enough to walk through the fire first.